Hello, hello. What is up, everybody? This is Marshall Lee of DonkeyJawProjects.com. And today we got another early bird Artcast. It's been a while, but we got two of our favorite guests here. We have Teresa Del Pilar. How you doing?
Hello, I'm doing all right. How are
Awesome.
you?
Doing great. Where can people find you, Teresa?
They can find me here on YouTube, Teresa del Pilar, the same name as below, and they can find me on Instagram, same name but with underscores in between the words.
Awesome. And Russ, how you doing?
Oh, fine, thanks. Long time no see
Yeah.
in the internet world, anyway.
Yeah, no doubt. Where can people find you, Russ?
Yeah, you can find me here on YouTube as Comic Book Black Belt, or over on Instagram, russleach.com, comicbookblackbelt.com, onlydeathcansavus.com, and you can sign up for the email list there to keep abreast of what I'm doing.
Awesome. And you guys know where you can find me, donkeyjawprojects.com, and Marsh Comics on Instagram and Twitter. So today I asked for suggestions in our little Facebook Messenger group, and got a couple suggestions, one from Marius and one from Brian, and I'm thinking that the one that Brian suggested is probably a good one for today. So we'll go with that. Brian Smallwood. He also has a YouTube channel. I'm not sure if he's done videos lately. I haven't been watching my subscription as close as I used to. But he does a really cool comic called Wildcat, and I really enjoy his videos and his comic work. And he brought up the suggestion of talking about the importance of building up a team for your comics and the pros and cons of going solo, which I thought was really interesting because it's just crazy because there is a long tradition of comics being a team sport. That is, it's a medium that you work on with other people. You play one part and everybody else kind of plays their role. But in the sort of recent history, it feels recent for me, but for some people it might be ancient. There has been people who have done comics in the kind of mainstream realm all by themselves. I think of Frank Miller, doing Dark Knight, and and then also a lot of people in the independent scene. Dave Sim doing Cerebus, and a lot of the other people kind of from back at that time, and so we've seen that people kind of having a single vision can also be a pretty powerful way to do comics. But being at the level I'm at, and various levels that my friends are at, a lot of times all you can do is go solo. You don't really have a choice, at least at first. And it's not the easiest thing to do a comic all by yourself. So I don't know. I'm curious, what you guys think. Teresa, you've I think for the most part, from what I can see, you've done mostly stuff by yourself. Do you enjoy that aspect? Do you wish you kind of had a team around you to do this stuff?
Well, yeah, mostly I do. I find that I started doing things on my own exactly like for the reason you just said, because you don't have anyone else. When you start, it's like I have a pen and I have some paper and I have to get started. You don't have a team. But as I've been doing comics now for like 3 years, and I've started being part of the community, and at the moment I'm working with other people quite often. In fact, I'm working right now on a anthology that we're doing together, three people. So there's two artists and one writer, which I really love. It's great. So like he is doing, the other artist is doing the backgrounds, which is like okay, and he's doing the inking and I'm doing the character art and the coloring. So it's like we've split it that way. And it's a bit of an experiment, but we've done one previous to this one doing this method, and it's really good. And on the one hand, it's great because you get more work out in less time. But on the other hand, it is true that the benefits you get from this anthology, or the money you make, is less. So there are pros and cons, and there's different ways the economics of it works. But I think I prefer working in a team, and working solo is like a exercise to improve and to get better at the different aspects. If that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, no doubt. I think it can be when you're used to working by yourself, it can certainly be kind of a breath of fresh air to not have to do everything when that's what you're used to. But at the same time, you also have things like Graduation Nightmare,
Hmm.
and the other big project you're working on. There's something also kind of
Yeah.
gratifying about kind of having control over all the different aspects as well. Would you think so? Or
Uh, yes, but I think no, not for me, not a lot, no.
Mm,
Because I tend to get too much into my head, and when I'm writing on my own, I think like this is amazing, and then you show it to someone else, like this paragraph doesn't make sense. So I think even when you're working on your own, you need outside perspectives and other people. I don't think you can create anything other than a diary entry without
mm.
other people getting involved in the process.
Yeah, you can get into some trouble if you're working in a vacuum and you have nobody looking at it, for sure. Russ, it's kind of interesting because I feel like, and I may correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you're almost on the opposite side of things where you've kind of mostly worked with teams and now you're kind of you're still kind of working with people, but you're doing your solo thing. What do you think about the differences of the two?
Yeah, I did, the two of you have verbalized it extremely well. There are pros and cons, and you're right. Most of the time, I've been working in teams. I'm still working with teams on different projects, but I suppose in some cases, in some ways, I should say, I'm a little bit of a control freak because with the book that I'm working on now for myself, I had a vision of how it should be, and I'm kind of not trusting anybody else to be involved in it. But there's also an aspect of not relying on anybody else, and so not risking that aspect of the production because it's my book, because I'm not being paid by a production company or a publisher to fulfill my aspect of a team's portion of my portion of the team's work. So because it's all about what I want, I've taken on the mantle of doing everything because I want a particular look and feel to the whole thing. But Teresa is absolutely right. You need other people involved, even if you're going to do something completely on your own. Get an editor. From a comic book production perspective, get an editor, get other people to look at your work and pick things out. So even though you're working on your own and you're effectively the whole team, make sure that you've got some kind of creative backup from different opinions. And yeah, there's like a checklist of what's great about being on a team and what's great about doing things on your own. You do have truly creative control, and it's all down to you. But you've got no one else to blame either. You're taking full responsibility for absolutely everything, and you don't get as much done. I know that sounds really weird, but you don't, because obviously I'm looking at one book that's going to take me much longer than if I just did the pencils on it. Somebody else wrote it, somebody else inked it, somebody else did the lettering and the colors. I just did the pencil work. Within a month, I'd be done. But it's going to take me 3-4 months maybe of total, start to finish production without even taking into account things like the story writing and character development and that kind of stuff. So in some ways, you're limiting yourself by being on your own because you're not actually outputting as much as you would if you were within a team and just doing a particular job within that team. So, those are the ups and downs, the pros and cons, as it were, of working on your own or and being focused, or working with a team and outputting that much more volume.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. And it's interesting that, you know, basically, even if you think of some of these other examples, like, Frank Miller doing The Dark Knight or something, or even Sin City, I'm sure, I don't really know his process with Sin City, but I know with the Dark Knight, there's no way that DC let him do that without having some kind of editorial input. DC is pretty notorious for having editorial input. But at the same time, they did pretty much let him have free reign in a way that you don't typically see from the big two, or at least before then. I don't feel like you typically saw too often. And so there's always a team. I'm sure he probably didn't do his own lettering or something. I don't really know exactly, but there's different aspects. And that I think that's the biggest con though, is working solo. Is working in a vacuum. Well, there's two. I think the two biggest cons is working in a vacuum is just it's I don't know. It's like it's kind of like the idea of like you were like in a bunker for like years, not seeing the outside world or something, and you create something, but it's not relatable to anybody because it's just you in this hole, like working. And not being able to bounce stuff off of people, it's just you need that feedback. There's all kinds of blind spots. No matter how much you look over what you're working on, there's always going to be crazy blind spots that you may have not noticed. Do you guys, when you're working on your own solo work, do you actively, I already know the answer to this, but do you actively, seek out outside perspectives? And, if so, how does that seem to help you? Any one of you could take that.
Well, I think you know my answer. I'm always looking for beta readers. So if you're interested in beta reader, being a beta reader for any of my comics, please shoot me an email. Go over to my channel. I have my email in all my descriptions, or you can contact me on social media. Yeah, absolutely. I think what you're saying is absolutely right, in the sense that if you're on your own creating from your own perspective, that's not the best way to communicate. And in my opinion, art a lot of the times is a form of communication. And it's like, how are you going to prepare to communicate with real people if you're talking to yourself? And you can put yourself in their position. So like, I think there are some people, some geniuses of this type of communication that can sit in a room on their own and do it all themselves. But I think the majority of us, we need someone to say, hey, I can't understand what you're going on about in this section. So at the bare minimum, you need that perspective, even if you don't have a team.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Is that you need other people to look at the writing. You definitely needed an editor, and not just an editor from the perspective of they're going to pick up, bad grammar. You want someone that's going to examine the story and say, look, this works. The arc works, the characters work, the motives work. But also, exactly right, as Teresa's saying, it's just, passing it amongst people, and passing it amongst your peers whenever you can, and then testing that out with them and getting the feedback. So even though you're kind of, hammering away at the coalface on your own, you've still got that backup of taking the right direction.
Yeah. And I also think there is an element of, even when you're working on your own, the type of work that you're going to produce is not going to be the same type of work that you produce when you're working in a team.
No.
So when you're working on your own, I think it makes sense for works that are exploring internal aspects of you. So like if you're doing a autobiographical comic, it makes sense to do it on your own. Or if you're doing something that is internal or is personal. But if you're creating entertainment, why would you do it on your own?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's interesting kind of to move towards some of the benefits of, for kind of considering what you guys have said, some of the benefits of working on a team. And one thing I'll just add with the outside perspective thing too is, like I said in my last vlog, it's also really good to get perspective from people who aren't necessarily comic makers, who, maybe not even artists or not writers. And like I bounced a lot of these ideas off of my wife, and she has given me so much valuable input, because everybody knows story. Everybody, whether they think deeply about it or they just enjoy movies, TV, books, whatever. Everybody has a sense of understanding story. And if they see something and they're like, well, I don't quite get that, or, you know, it would be really cool if you had this character do this, or here's another, like, what if this character, thought this. Like, there's a lot of little subtle things that I don't always think of that, like, my wife will bring into a character, and I'm like, wow, that makes the character have so much more depth. Like, yes, please, more, give me more information.
You need to
So,
pass everything at least once past one normie, because a normie will give you no there'll be no leeway for sort of special characteristics, or not good reasons for people to do things in stories. A normie will say, well, that doesn't make any sense. I don't care how powerful that being is, or how magical they are, or how wonderful they are. It just doesn't make sense. And so you're absolutely right. I pass everything past my wife because she's a normie and I'm not. and I get good responses, and obviously I pass it through other people as well. But because she's there all the time, it's easy to like pass things through her. It's almost like an ever-present normie editor. It will just look over my shoulder and go, no, that's wrong. Don't be stupid. And it helps. It really does help. But definitely pass it through a whole range of people, like you say, not just other creators and other comic readers, but people who wouldn't necessarily read a comic, or in our case, read a comic or whatever. People who would see it from another perspective and still be able to understand and empathize with your story. So
Yeah. I think what you've said there is really important. Like, understand and empathize with your story is the most important thing, because sometimes, and this is something I do with, like, when I open things to anyone giving me feedback, there's a danger that people will try and turn your story into what they would enjoy. And that's not what you're trying to do.
No.
And so what I do is I do the ABCs of beta reading, which is like, what did you find amazing? What did you find boring? And what did you find confusing? And it's more about how they feel rather than how they would fix it. Because I don't want their input on how to do my story. I just want to know if it's coming across correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. That's a big part of it. So moving into kind of working on things with a team, and kind of building a team around you, there's a couple different aspects of it. I feel like a big part of what we do, whether we do it solo or with a team, is community. And I kind of feel like the community is part of the team. And I get a lot of feedback from that, whether it's just support on, keep going, Marsh, that type of thing, or, it's like, oh, I have some thoughts on this character design you're working on, or something like that. All that stuff is really helpful. But also, it's kind of like, I've just come off of working on Lone Wolf not too long ago. If anybody who's watched for a while knows, I was working on that for most of last year. And besides the writing, I was doing, the penciling, the inking, the coloring, and the lettering. And, it can get very overwhelming. And one thing I learned from other stories, a lot of other stories, probably the biggest one I always kind of can think of that's right there is like Harry Potter. And Harry Potter is the main person in this story, and that's who you're rooting for. That's who you're following to a certain extent. But if Harry Potter didn't have his friends helping him, like, then maybe this sounds cheesy, but like he wouldn't have accomplished the things he could accomplish in every single book. It's always because of the help of his friends that he can do this. And I feel like there's something amazing that happens when you make a comic. And that's one thing that I think is really cool about the tradition of making comics with a team. Whether you're super connected with the team or not, yes, there's something cool about a single vision, but at the same time, when something new comes about that not any single person necessarily envisioned entirely. There's something that comes out of the group. And I think there's a strength to that. Would you say so, Russ?
Yeah, it really depends on what you're writing, what the comic is, what the output is. It's not always. I mean, you've given some great examples like Sin City and Dark Knight and what have you, and then you look at, for instance, someone like Sean Gordon Murphy. You know, the stuff that he's producing. There is something to be said for a single vision. There's something to be said for a purity. But that's what's great about having so many different types of comics and projects, is that you can have projects that are like that, and you can have obviously the majority of projects that are team efforts, and it's all about having so many different perspectives and points of view. So I think it depends, like I was saying as I started off my point, it depends on what you're trying to what your aim is, what your final goal is, as far as the kind of story you're trying to tell, and maybe the audience as well. It depends what you're aiming for, I think, as to whether that's truly relevant. Outside of that aspect of it, what's fun as making a book with other people, I would say it's more fun to make a book with other people. There's no doubt about that. From a purely personal human perspective, to be able to work with a team of people and see a product come out of that team work is a great thing. And you can all, sort of bask in the glory of whatever you've produced. You're kind of on your own a little bit. You're kind of living and dying by the sword, as it were, when you're doing your own book, and you've got that vision, but you have to be very, very focused to do that, which isn't easy, especially when you're trying to do other things at the same time. I mean, all of us work in one form or another on other projects or other jobs or whatever, so it is very difficult to be that focused. So if you're spreading yourself thin, it's obviously easier to produce books in groups, in teams, and that makes a difference. But that's a purely personal perspective rather than the end goal of the project itself.
Yeah, I totally, agree. And, I think is some examples too of, some people like, to me, I always think of like Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and, they both have done some pretty amazing things apart, and also like Kirby and Joe Simon, and like, Stanley and Jack Kirby, like they've done things apart, that have been really cool, but there's something special that came about when they were working together.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that I feel like sometimes a project can really benefit.
Believe you me, if I could sit and just draw the pages that were given to me by a writer, and see someone else ink them and color them and letter them and have them published on a weekly or monthly basis and get paid a page rate for it, I would do it. And I have done it in the past. But that's not an easy gig to get anymore. The way to make, it's not just about producing the project. For me, I'm a professional artist. That sounds very arrogant. That's what I do during the day for a living. I work with production companies and I illustrate, and that's how I make money. So I have to make something happen. And if I'm not getting the page gigs, then I have to go out and make something happen. I feel that I'm creative enough. I think I've got a writer in me somewhere, which is why I'm focused to make my own books. And it's kind of like I have to make that revenue stream. I have to make that business happen. Each project is its own business. And if I don't make it happen, then going out and trying to find the page gigs to fill my addiction, it's very, very difficult. I mean, I do other work. I'm working on several different projects with different production companies, doing storyboards and we're doing some digital comic stuff and what have you. But that's not feeding my addiction. My addiction is our comics. That's what I truly love. And I want to draw comics. I want to tell stories visually. And I'd love it for a writer to be able to give me those pages and me just pump those pages out, not have to worry about it. Just pump them out and then have a fantastic inker, just ink over the top of them and have that wonderful production line and do that. I would die to do that. That's just fantastic. But it isn't going to happen because comics aren't the same as they used to be. It's not the same world that it used to be. So it's very, very difficult to get into that situation. When you are in that situation, you're not guaranteed of keeping it. So that's why I think a lot of people, a lot of creators are saying, damn it, I'm going to do it myself. And that's what I'm doing. So, you know, and trying to keep track of a team and get them all paid, it's tricky. It's tough. That's really tough. Whereas if you're working on your own, you're not risking other people's revenue streams. It's really quite a mixed up thing. It's not just about, oh, should I do this on my own or should I do this with a team? There's so many different aspects involved, and it much like getting into comics, everybody's story, everybody's journey to that decision is different. So everybody's journey into making comics or being in comics or being paid to be a professional comic strip artist is different. Nobody gets into comics the same way. And so everybody's decision as to whether they work in a team or work on their own is all different, and it's driven by lots of different factors.
For sure. Teresa, what do you think about the idea of the different kind of creatively what can happen differently when you're working with a team as opposed to working by yourself? Do you think there's a benefit to that?
Well, I think there's two things here. One is like the single vision idea. To have someone directing the vision doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be on their own. I think when you are talking about a clear vision, you can have a person, anyone in the team, a director or whatever, like in a film, right? In a film, you have, hundreds of people working in it potentially, but you still get the single vision of the director. So I think when you have a team and you want to approach it in the way that we want a single vision, if you have a strong director and a person with good communication skills, you can still get that and get it with a team. And I think the quality of the product will be probably better, or at least get it out faster. Then on the other hand, if we're talking about what you're talking about here, which is the synergies that you create when you work with different people that have different views, that is a different type of product that you're creating. And it can be just as interesting, but it's just different, right? So I don't think it's necessarily one of those things where it's like single vision versus team. No, you can have a single vision in a team if you have a director or a person directing the project. Then the other thing is what Russ is talking, which is the economics of it. If you're going to gather a team, the pressure on that team is higher because you have to pay everyone in the team. And so the product that you create has to be going out and be enjoyed by a lot of people. And if you're on your own and you're printing on your own, the economic pressure is a lot lower. So maybe you can be more experimental, you can take more risks. So I think there's a lot of things to take into consideration here. Number one, do you want single vision or do you want to have like a collection of people putting things in there? And number two, can you afford to do that when you have to make a lot of money from this product because you have to pay everybody? So like experimentation is easier when you don't have a team, but making a commercially viable product is easier when you have a team. Having a single vision is easier when you have one person, but taking that vision to fruition is easier when you have a team. So like you can do everything in both situations, but in my opinion, it's better to have a team because it's faster and it's more fun.
Yeah.
And more efficient.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Teresa got that right. I just see Fitz Factor who was talking about it. Yeah, you're right. You do need other people. You can't just do it on your own, but it's as to what level you involve other people in the production, in the process. So you must never be on your own because that's just not healthy. It's not workable. It won't provide a good project, a good product or a good story, you have to have other people involved. It just comes down, and Teresa picked out what I was saying there, is it's not always about, what the best thing for the story is. It's also about the best thing for the product, the final production, how you can get it done, how it can be done quickest. But also sometimes there's risk involved and how you can mitigate the risk. So there's so many different factors. But you're
Yeah,
right,
like
shouldn't be on your own.
you have to think about what is the level of experimentation in this. Maybe you should go solo if you're trying to do something crazy. What is the level of commercial success that you expect from this? Like different things are better suited for different types of teams and different types of approaches. So you need to know what you want first, and then gather the team that fits that project best. And well, that's a different topic of conversation, how to gather that team. But
Yeah.
And,
All different. Yeah.
That's definitely a natural kind of next thought to go into, but unfortunately, it is time for me to get going. But yeah, I mean, building that team, it can be difficult, but I think there's also a natural way to do it. Just to kind of talk about it in short, real quick. If I were to say, be like, just all of a sudden be like, I want to make a comic, let's build a team, I wouldn't be able to do that, without having had years of, for a good 10 years or more or less, I've been communicating with all different creators and stuff. So I feel like right now, especially if I had some money, right now I could easily be like, hey, Russ, would you like to do pencils? I can give you this, whatever. We'll talk about money. Teresa, can you color? Mike Emirates, can you write? I can, do this part or whatever. And I bet like I could build a team. There's a lot of different people around me in the community that I've worked with already before in small or larger capacities. So it's easier to do that when you've spent a lot of time in the community of creative people, as opposed to, all of a sudden, oh, I need an artist. Maybe there's somebody I can convince to do art for me, and I don't really have any money, like that's not going to work so much. So you just got to be within the community, and, sometimes you can get into a project with people if you've already built those relationships where it's like, okay, we're all in this together. We're not necessarily making money on the front end, but we think we really have a good idea, and we're going to, maybe put together a pitch of 4 pages or however many pages and submit that to publishers, see if there's any legs to this type of thing. There's those kind of things. But you can't just kind of build a team out of thin air. Even in the professional levels, they don't do that. They recruit people and they go through a process. So yeah, that's just in short, but I do have to get going. Russ, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me here on YouTube. You can find me at Facebook, over at Instagram as Comic Book Black Belt. My website's russleach.com, onlydeathcansavus.com. That's the new book, and comicbookblackbelt.com, and they will have a link to my email subscription list. And if you sign up there, you'll be able to find out what I'm doing. Don't worry, I won't fill your inbox full of rubbish.
Awesome. And Teresa, where can people find you?
Here on YouTube, same name, Teresa del Pilar, and on Instagram, same name, but with underscores between the words.
All right, awesome. And you guys know where to find me, donkeyjawprojects.com and Marsh Comics on various social media. Thank you guys for coming on. It's been a while, and it's nice to have a couple familiar faces here to chat about comics with me. And a lot of familiar faces in the chat too. Thank you. And even unfamiliar faces. Thank you very much for being a part of this. This was really fun, and hopefully we could do longer ones, in the future. But for now, sometimes I have to do these short ones in the morning before work. So other than that, you guys all rock. We will talk to you on the next stream.
Bye-bye.
Later.